Hi, this is Ted Seilheimer from the University of Houston. I'm here with another NAAC conversation on behalf of the NAAC Rules Education Committee. As college sports faces financial challenges resulting in departments downsizing or instituting hiring freezes, compliance offices aren't immune to the pinch. However, a large majority of offices across the country are already operating with smaller staffs or potentially one-person operations. So today, I wanted to talk with leaders of two of those departments to see how they're maximizing resources and how they're making it work. First off, we have Colleen Cannon, the Assistant AD for Compliance and Student Services, as well as newly the SWA at Queen's University in Charlotte, as well as Andrew Kearney, the Associate AD for Compliance and Administration at Nicholls State University. So Colleen and Andrew, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you guys being here. First off, I'll start with you, Colleen, but Andrew here, chime in too. But if you guys can both kind of tell us a little bit about what your role is at your school, what sort of hats you have to wear, and then maybe important for this conversation, how many folks are working within your department?
Okay, so I am, as you said before, the Assistant AD for Compliance and Student Service and newly the SWA. And we have roughly about 30 sports and over 650 student athletes. And so I work with every last student athlete we have, including our clubs. So we do have men's rugby club and men's and women's tri club, as well as a women's tri NCAA. So try to keep up with that, right? But I work with every sport that we have on campus. I work with all of the coaches. I do whatever, anything they need me to do, I'm more than happy to do. But I also work with financial aid, on campus, the registrar's office. And so we just have to make sure that with all the student athletes we have on campus, that we are just everyone's on the same page and kind of helping the ship get rolling. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. Oh, and I'm also on the student support team. And so that's an institutional team that we do to help support student athletes who, or not just student athletes, but just students, period, who may be struggling with adapting to online classes, because we did go 100% virtual this fall. Gotcha. They may be struggling with, coming up with tutoring, books, things of that sort. And so we try to help sort out those matters with those students.
And if I remember looking at your staff directory, you have one other person that's working underneath you in a compliance role, right?
Yeah, so I do have one graduate assistant. So I get a graduate assistant every year. And her name is Ratisha Rafaela, and she is brand new this year. So it's also a challenge for us with trying to teach her while being virtual as well. And so we do we call, Zoom meetings and Ring Central meetings, but it is a challenge trying to train someone who is not on campus and not in front of you.
Right. Now, Andrew, I believe you're the one-person shop, correct?
Yes. I've gotten pretty lucky. Our registrars are certifying official, though, and so I work with him a lot. He's been tremendous. He works an insane amount of hours, so he's kind of always working. If I need to get in touch with him, financial aid, same thing. There's someone in scholarship. So, Ted, I know there's a few times we've talked, and it's not something that I've input somewhere, APR, academic data, or something. I'm doing other roles in that. So while it's just me, there are, a number of people across campus that are kind of pitching in a certain area, and it helps because it's their specialty, and that's helped. It's one person, it's impossible. We have 17 teams, 350 student athletes, and football is its own monster at times with with everything there. So while it's just me, there's help across campus, and I know for us in general, we're a very much smaller department. So anything we do, if it's, grab someone from across the hall, if they, help me for 20 minutes, you're going to save me an hour. And so they just kind of reciprocate that. And we have a pretty good family atmosphere that helps, even though it's technically just me. And then our SWA has a compliance background as well. And so when she came on campus, it was tremendous, just in the little, you're questioning yourself, like, I think I'm right, but and you can't get anyone on the phone, and you want to give a coach an answer. So it's been the last 3 years she's been here. It's been tremendous just to have that other person just to talk to daily, and help your sanity, because you're getting lost in an interpretation that you thought you saw 3 years ago.
Right. Well, I guess that's a good segue to my next question in terms of then prioritizing. And when I was thinking about this question, I was like, okay, well, what do you guys put on the back burner? And I don't think anyone wants to admit to what goes down the list, but maybe what are some of those things that always get your first attention, so that when you guys are prioritizing your work, is there some bylaw or some topic or maybe even a sport that you're always putting ahead of the others because it's going to require more immediate attention?
As I was thinking about this question, I think for me, everyone, how they prioritize things a little bit differently. But I kind of look at external deadlines and internal deadlines. If we want an example, we have a care log that needs to be due. We're trying by the 5th of every month for the previous month, and that's not as much as the attestation of compliance that's due next week on the 15th. I'm going to be chasing down our AD to make sure he's finished that instead of a coach turning in a care log. Right. I think the other for me is because we're smaller, and it helps, I think, just generally in terms of a compliance, in terms of the department overall, like we're doing what we're supposed to. Our coaches are, our student athletes are. I try and answer our student athletes and coaches as quick as possible. We're working with them, beside them, to give them the tools they need to succeed. So I try and do that. One of the things I worry about is people not thinking my door's open. And so I was getting, the coaches those answers, answering my phone. I know my wife doesn't always like it sometimes when I take those phone calls, but I think the prioritizing them and getting them those tools, I know, because they can work on, they're on the road and they're recruiting, not right now, but it's just a different timeline for them.
So if I'm learning anything from you guys already, it's that perhaps the normal things that happen along the way, hopefully you have the procedures and the training already in place so that those practice logs, some of those evals or some of the other things you're doing will be happening regularly, may not necessarily be under your control, but you're making sure it gets through. So you can focus on some of these other big things that are happening. The other thing is find a good registrar, send them flowers and cookies, and make sure that they're able to help you out, as well as anybody else on campus that kind of has, I think that's something that everybody should probably learn from, in terms of, taking stuff off of your plate and feeling comfortable with somebody else entering that data, or feeling comfortable with somebody else sending that response, when I think a lot of us have a lot of control issues with wanting to be the one to say it and put it in our specific words.
I just think trust, like just having 3 or, I don't know, even if it's 1, just people you can trust, and it's
Well, as maybe then the next question, then, as we look off campus, are there any sort of resources outside of Queens or Nicholls that you guys regularly turn to, whether it's an online resource, something coming from NAAC, or your own peers or conferences that you guys regularly turn to for assistance?
Oh, yes. Elaine at my conference knows me. It's not a good week if I don't at least call her once or twice a week with a question, her and Amelia. And so I do rely a lot on my conference office staff, but also we have a D2 NAAC group that I can throw a question in there, and it should go out to all of the D2 compliance officers that is in that group. And that has helped out tremendously. We don't do it as much, I think, because of COVID and how we all had to switch gears. But, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I threw a question, in there and got some answers. So I definitely look to my constituents and my other coworkers and, just different people to get their thoughts and opinions. Just so many things have happened. And I mean, Andrew, with COVID, the amount of legislation that has changed, week by week, you definitely need another person to remind you that, no, you're not going insane. It was like that last week, but it is not like that this week. So you do need that other person to make sure that, yes, Colleen, you're not going crazy. They did flip it. So, but that's just the nature of COVID. We're just having to constantly change and maneuver and alter the way we've done things. What we thought was this bylaw is not this bylaw anymore for right now, for 2021. And we could very well go back to that for 21, 22. So.
No, I completely agree. I think for us as well, Thomas Samuel at the Southland Conference has been tremendous. Before he got there, it felt like there's a period of about 6 months where there wasn't anyone in that position. And you just kind of forget about how much, you rely on someone in that role. I think the other one for me is meeting, other people in our conference office who are, generally facing some of the same issues, whether it's that we have to deal with. And then we have 4 other institutions in our university system that are in our conference. And so sometimes there's something very specific for us that, calling someone at Sam Houston State who's in our conference, it may not be they're dealing with a different set of circumstances rather than calling Dustin Eubanks at Northwestern State, which I'll do. So I think it's just that it's like I get back, like it's finding people you can trust. When you talk through things and just like you're making analogies to something else because this situation you're dealing with does not fit in a box. It's like a tree. It's got these little branches that are kind of going all over, and you like this nice little twig, but it's never that.
Yeah.
And so it's finding those people. I think for me, and that because there's a lot riding on a simple mistake sometimes. So trust is really big.
Well, then coming back to campus, as you try and find those folks that you can trust on your campus. Colleen, you mentioned that you have a grad assistant. Andrew, you mentioned that you often go to other folks, maybe not a compliance folks, but other folks in your department to help out with stuff. Are there any tips or ways that you try and identify people to fill some of these, whether it's an ad hoc role, just helping out with a project, or maybe finding an internship, a grad assistant position, or maybe even utilizing fifth-year student athletes who are on aid that maybe have an obligation to work with the department? Are there any of those avenues you guys have found have been effective in terms of getting more manpower to assist your efforts?
For me in compliance, I do have my graduate assistant, and she's wanting to hit the ground rolling. But again, it is a challenge because she has not done compliance, but she would like to get into that. Mm-hmm. And so trying to train her remotely has been a challenge because, of course, our institution is closed and we are not allowed on campus right now. I've been able to finally get back on campus. Within the past week, I was able to get back on campus, but before that, we had not been to campus since about March. And so it did pose some challenges on how to properly train her, but she has been a tremendous help. Some of those things, like official visits, mm-hmm. Adding students to the roster, removing students to the rosters, those kind of things could take up a lot of time if they're coming in back to back to back and kind of remove you from some of the bigger things that you have to do. And so she's been really, really great with taking on that ownership, and just making sure she's also helping keep the ball rolling because she understands, with restructuring and a role change, mm-hmm. More things, came on my plate.
Right. Well, do you hire?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, there's probably one place that it might be a little non-traditional, but working with a lot of our coaches mm-hmm. and getting their feedback on things, and where I may not have another compliance person in the office next to me or something, mm-hmm. Having those conversations with them and seeing how whatever we're doing, it's going to affect every sport a little bit different, and them willing to have those conversations. So, knowing, as we're talking through legislation that's proposed, leading up to when it's passed, having an idea of how it's going to impact those programs. Mm-hmm. I think while it's not someone, an assistant or something like that, there's 2 or 3 of us. I think it does save time in the long run. It's very proactive in having an understanding how that's going to work at your institution.
Well, I think you guys hit on a couple different things that I've heard other places do that I haven't done myself. One is, having coaches fill some of those roles that maybe younger compliance staffers do. I have a number of coaches that will do their own high school evaluations because that's what they did when they first started, if they were at a smaller school or were understaffed at some point, and they obviously have a better understanding of what they're looking for, can maybe self-vet some of those folks who may not be the best academic coming in as freshmen. The other thing is Colleen was mentioning, obviously utilizing existing grad programs or other programs on campus to try and find a partnership, whether that's you identifying a candidate and then they apply to a grad program, or working with the program of saying, okay, well, if you have your pool of students and then potentially you have the compliance and maybe other opportunities in the office for them to then fill in some of these roles on a regular basis. Obviously with any young person, then you have the learning curve of getting them on board, but also then how long they're going to be there. Because then once you train them to do it, how long are they going to be functional and helpful to actually get that job done along the way? There's a lot of different avenues to look at, but obviously there's geography and the school and, and potentially what the what your school's rules are about taking volunteers. Some schools are very strict about not having anybody who doesn't have a formal internship or employment relationship with the school. So being aware of what your school will and will not allow. Well, I guess the last question, somewhat of a general one, in terms of kind of what you guys would give as any sort of overarching philosophies or advice for folks, just kind of how to make it work when you wish you had more folks.
I think for me with COVID, in my opinion, it just kind of put some pressure on compliance officers to have answers, right? Because there were so much changes in legislation and things of that sort. And I had to remind myself, it's okay if you don't know everything. It's okay, because you want to, right? You want your coaches to depend on you, but I also had to remind myself, it is okay if you have to reach out. It's okay if you don't remember, because we changed it so much. It is okay if you don't always have it together 100% of the time.
Right.
No, I agree. And I think kind of going back to COVID in general, if we wanted to have a Zoom call on March 1st, coaches like, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. Now we can do those things. The same thing with student athlete. That's, if you go into kind of a alumni, everyone's the same thing. Everyone can now do these things. So I think from a communication standpoint, there's so many more avenues. We've had to communicate, or things are going to happen that you do not want. So I think that's definitely helped. And then Colleen talked about, I've kind of generally always come at things from that, like, I don't know, assume you don't know, look things up, get someone to reaffirm something with you. I mean, 6, 9, 18, 24-hour percentages, GPAs, like know all that from an academic standpoint. There's certain things, but the things you don't deal with every day, the things you haven't touched upon in 2 months ago, look it up. And it may take an extra 30 seconds then, but it may save you weeks down the road. So that's for me. And then in doing that, that's how I kind of try to approach education with our coaches and student athletes as well. It's impossible for everyone to know everything. So it's, when to ask questions and when to, and that's the other thing, is then making myself available as well to try and make sure we're getting those questions answered.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you guys are doing a great job leveraging the relationships on campus and building those relationships off, and all with the goal of being a good steward for your university and the folks that you're working with. So I appreciate your time today, talking to us a little bit about how to maximize resources in a smaller office. Again, this was the NAAC Conversation. Appreciate you all for joining us. We'll see you next month for another good talk with more folks in the industry. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.